Welcome to the Success in Africa podcast with Dr. Modupe, your weekly dose of leadership vitamins to make you successful in Africa.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Success in Africa podcast. My name is Dr. Modupe Taylor Pierce, and I am a scholar and practitioner of leadership and organizational development. Simply put, I study what makes people successful. I have been doing this for 3 decades now with a particular focus on people in Africa, having success in Africa. And in this podcast, we share stories, lessons, and insights about those people. Last year, for most episodes, I would tell their stories. This year, we've pivoted to bringing those successful people onto the podcast and having you hear from them directly. Why are we doing this? Because I have a vision for Africa. I have a vision of Africa becoming a middle-income continent by 2030 and high-income by 2040. And for this to happen, I need you to be successful. That's you listening to this episode. Every single African needs to become successful for Africa to achieve that vision. So I encourage you, like this podcast, subscribe to it so that we can build it and others can know about it and learn from those who have had success. This episode, by the way, is brought to you courtesy of BCA Online, which is your one-stop shop for mastering leadership. Joining BCA Online is free. It gives you access to countless hours of knowledge, videos, and a plethora of information about leadership that will enhance your leadership capacity. So if you've got some questions, just click the link on the screen below and you can ask your questions there. Join BCA Online. Now I'm going to pivot with you, Inutu, to your early years, because I'm sure some people are saying, yeah, but how do I even get in? So let's talk a bit about your formative years. You alluded to school. Where did you grow up? And did you have a parent who just, put you in the business? How did this happen? Tell us a bit about your formative years.
Okay, so I was born in Zambia. Was born in Kitwe in the Copperbelt in 1973. That's when I was born in the Copperbelt. Both of my parents used to work for the mines. They were both worked for the mines. My late father, who passed on in 2021, he worked for the mines, which at that time was NCM, I think, in Changa Copper Consolidated Mine in Chingola. And my mother, also a recent graduate, she was then placed at the same mine. And a colleague of my father's told him, he said, I think I found you a wife. And introduced my mom to my dad. And the rest is history. So they worked. I think my dad was my mom's boss, if I'm not mistaken, because they both worked in the personnel department, and they had both studied. My mother had done psychology. My father had also done psychology as well. So born in Kitwe, but we moved to Lusaka pretty early. I mean, I can't honestly remember living in Kitwe as a child. My earliest memories are living in Lusaka. So I went to nursery school here. I went to primary school here. My formative years were pretty much any child growing up in the 70s in Africa. At that time, there was a lot of hope, but we didn't have much. I come from a middle income home. Both of my parents were working. My dad then left the mines and worked for what was called the United Bus Company, which was a parastatal company. And my mother continued working. She started working for Anglo American. And I had working parents. It was a typical working class family. And it was my brother and I. My sister came on much later when I was in grade 6, going into grade 7, 7th grade. So my younger sister was born. So it was very much around family. I remember shortages of bread, people queuing up for food. So my mom used to bake in order to supplement that. We ended up, you bake your own bread, you know. So we learned. So in my early formative years, I probably, without, now that I'm speaking to you about it, I think what we probably were learning is to adjust and adapt and pivot based on situations and circumstances, which are things that we don't necessarily realize are happening to us in our formative years. Um, I was fortunate enough to go to a good nursery school. My parents tell me the story of how they took me to one nursery school first, and I came back that day. I do believe my mom says I was about 3.5 to 4, and I complained very bitterly that day that I didn't ever want to go back there. And when they asked me why, I said I didn't learn anything. I just played the whole thing. I thought going to school was about learning. So please don't take me back there tomorrow because I don't want to play. I want to learn. So at a very young age, I was like, really? So, they had to find another nursery school that best suited the person who wanted to learn, not play. So then I went to a primary school called Nkwazi. A lot of children went to. If you went to private school, you either went to Nkwazi, you went to. If your parents could afford the International School of Lusaka, it was the International School of Lusaka or Lake Road. It was one of the three schools. There were only three private schools. The rest were either missionary schools or government schools. My parents were big believers in education. So for them, sacrificing for us to go to good schools was something that came second nature to them. My dad, he went to school in Zimbabwe. He went from grade 1, up until probably, I think, what was Form 3 at the time. He went to school in Zimbabwe because his father also strongly believed in education. My grandfather, my mother's father as well, also strongly believed in education, the importance of education. So it didn't, you could sacrifice a fancy car so that your children went to a very good school. So that was inculcated in my parents and also inculcated in me as well. That education is key. If you there's the one my father would always say that didn't you wouldn't you can't take that away from anybody. So in my formative years, I played like any other typical, African child growing up. We lived a little bit far out of town, what seemed far out of town then, but we're now right in town. There was a little stream, and between us, the stream and the compound location, high density area, we used to cross the stream, go into the market and buy. Oh, I think my mother would kill us if she knew what we used to eat. We'd go into the market and buy, anything that we could find. We bought guinea pigs and brought them home and, thought that we were rearing it. So it was that kind of lifestyle, which I love the outdoors. To this day, I still love the outdoors. Um, but I didn't have a lot of friends. I'm a little bit of I talk a lot when I'm in very comfortable spaces, but otherwise I tend to be quite reserved. So I would have two friends, and those were my two friends, my neighbor and my cousins. That was it. So those were the formative years. School, I was an exceptional student. I always school was never difficult for me. It came easy. I loved it. Um, I loved learning new things. I took part in every afternoon activity that was there at school. My mom would joke that I worked. Saying that she goes at 7:30, she comes back at 5 because she works at school. So I said, "What do you mean?" Said, "No, she makes sure that she participates because I believe that that broad knowledge of participating in things helps build your character." So those were my formative years.
So, how did an introvert, or some might say a bookworm, end up going into real estate where many people will think, oh, you got to be a talkative person, a good yapper. Tell me how you got into the real estate industry. Did it come straight out of college?
No, not necessarily. No, it was not by desire. It was actually by God's design. I went to university. When I finished university, my mother was involved in politics. She was actively involved in politics, and she was in the opposition. As with any African country, when your parent is in opposition, children begin to pay the price. I had dreamt of a job of working within the banking sector. Whilst I was at university, I was sponsored by Meridian BL, and unfortunately, the bank closed whilst I was at university. But I had saved up, and my parents were also able to, finish up paying for my school. The reason why I was sponsored by Meridian BL at the Copperbelt University was actually I had applied to go to the US for university, so I was accepted at Brown, and and I was meant to go to Brown, and then I don't know, somewhere somehow I did not get the scholarship from Meridian. Did not sponsor me at Brown. I get a letter that I'm sponsored at Copperbelt University. It was very tough. It was very disappointing because I had really looked at a different kind of life, so I had to adjust. It took me quite a bit. It really did knock me off my feet because I thought, what am I going to do? Copperbelt University. How do you compare that to Brown? That's Ivy League. But like again, you pivot. You say, I'm going to do the best that I can. So going back to my mother being in opposition, she worked very closely with KK, Kenneth Kaunda. She was a member of the Central Committee for UNIP. This was when KK was trying to come back into active politics. And this was at the height of it, 1996. That's when I'm finishing university. I'm graduating in 96. And my mother is everywhere as, in the opposition. So and at that time, you can imagine this is just 5 years into from one party state into multi-party democracy. We're still not learning. We're still not learning how to live with each other. Even to this day, we have a lot to learn in terms of embracing other people's political ideologies and respecting them. So, so I couldn't get a job. Everywhere I went, I was. The minute they see my name, they would ask, yes, I'm her daughter, and okay, we'll get back to you. We'll get back to you. So I did quite a few odd jobs, to be quite honest. I worked for a spare parts company, um, installing an accounting. So I worked for an accounting firm that was installing QuickBooks, the QuickBooks accounting software, in a company. It was a 6-month stint. I said, okay, fine, I'll get it. Let me get what I can. From there, I worked for a company called Translux, which was a transportation company that used to have buses that would come from South Africa to Zambia. I mean, those days that was the big thing. Now luxury buses, and they were very popular. So I worked in operations there. So I started having this experience of working in different businesses. And I don't know how, it's at that time you sit there and you wonder, oh, I wish I had a job at the central bank, or, I can't even join government, because I did consider joining government to say, maybe let me just, but of course, how could I join government? And there's no way I was going to be employed by government. So I thought, no, let me now adjust. I worked in the fast food industry, and through the fast food industry, then I was exposed to property and vehicle sales, because both businesses that were owned, the families had interest in real estate. So I went, I was looking after a real estate portfolio. And what I did was look at it from a different perspective and say, this is a business. Let me not look at it as houses. These are businesses. So took the portfolio and analyzed it using what I had learned, what I had read, and said, okay, is this portfolio performing or not? And that was my introduction into real estate, was really managing a portfolio for people. And I enjoyed it thoroughly. I enjoyed going into a house, going into an office block and saying, we need to renovate this, you need to change this to be able to increase the value, because the rentals that we're getting right now are below market rate, getting the gardeners, knocking on people's doors, speaking to people. So in my reserved nature, because of my curious mind of always wanting to know, how do we do this better? Should we sell? Should we? Why? Looking at other real estate markets in the world, people are buying and selling. Why aren't we buying and selling here? So that's how this bookworm came into real estate. In that, yeah, I started looking at it like it's a financial analysis, because I did a bachelor's in business administration, and and I majored in strategic management. I mean, I was exposed to corporate finance, all those things. So I looked at it very differently from, these are just houses that people buy and sell and people rent. And then, of course, I do love construction sites. I love construction sites. To be in a hard hat and walk around the site and see something go from zero, from the ground up, and to see things actualized, and then to go back years later and see people walking through a shopping center or an office block, or people living in a home that, or a housing estate that I recall as just a piece of earth that had nothing on it. So yes, so that's a little bit about how I ended up there.
Amazing. I love it. And so you were, in a sense, managing the real estate portfolio for some, let's call it wealthy individuals or a fast food company. And then how did you then end up basically making this a business?
I also, so the truth is that I also enjoyed the independence that came from looking after a real estate portfolio for a family that were not based in the country. Part of the family was based here, but family were based outside. So having that independence, and them giving me the license to think, made me realize something about, I think I don't want to be put in a box. I don't think I want to necessarily work for somebody in a way that it'll be, I'll be constrained. So I felt that, one, I needed additional experience. I felt that I didn't have sufficient experience to be able to actually run a business on my own, because I needed a little bit more experience. I was running a real estate portfolio that was doing well, but I wanted some commercial exposure. I now wanted a lens from a developer perspective, because I thought, okay, if I'm going to go into this, let me learn more. And the best way is that to actually learn. I mean, I looked at courses online. NYU's got some fantastic real estate courses, but they're all American based, which is a very different market here, where our mortgage interest rate is sitting at, in excess of 20%, north of 20%. It's difficult to raise finance. I needed a developer lens. So fortunately for me, a friend of mine managed to get me work with a property development company. And I worked and got the lens of a property. And I specifically went in there and I said, I want to set up my own business. I want to own my own real estate firm where I provide brokerage services. So I'm coming to work, but ultimately I would like to own my own business. And the partners were quite generous enough because all four of them were entrepreneurs. So they understood what it was, and they said, that's fine, we can be your super client, because everybody needs that one client that helps them in the beginning to get them off their feet. And I said, fine, and I started working for them. And the question was, you want to do this on your own? And one of them advised me to get a franchise. Why don't you consider getting a franchise? Because a franchise will give you a little bit of a head start, because you've got the brand, you've got the name, and you would have a certain experience. So I started looking at the different franchises, had conversations with different franchises. Some of them were not ready to come into Zambia. Others were not. Others wanted a level of control that I was not necessarily comfortable with. I said, well, I don't want to work for the franchisee and franchisor. It should be my business, and I want to be able to create a business model that also works for me. So from there, that's when my super client, what would have been my super client, two of them decided to say, okay, look, we'd actually like to join forces with you, and we would like to set up this property company with you. I said, well, yeah, let's do this. But all of us have to put money, and you will be required to run it. And I said, yes, that is my expectation. If I'm going to be, I said, this is my vision, so I'm not going to pass it on to somebody else to run. But yes, we started the company together, and eventually we ended up with a permanent franchise.
Amazing. Wow. I'm just blown away. So, okay, so much to unpack here, so much to learn. I mean, number one, I'm learning that, the whole theme of adjust, adapt, and pivot was something that, without realizing it, your parents taught you that just by moving you to different places, and you learned that. Second, I'm learning that, you had a thirst for learning. And that thirst for learning not only fueled you to do well in school, but also it actually fueled you to do well in the real estate business, because you learned more about it. And that's what then took you to your first real estate sort of employer. And thirdly, I'm learning the value of having mentors, because you worked for these folks who had experience in the area, and because you worked for them and you listened to them and you learned from them and you proved yourself, not only were they willing to allow you to get your own business, but they actually became investors in your business in the process.
Tomorrow belongs to those people who prepare for it today. See you next week.